They say a man can outrun wolves, drought, and sorrow, but not the secrets that ride in after dark. Jonah Mercer learned that on the night he took a wife. The wind had been steady since sundown, brushing dry grass against the porch steps like fingers asking to be let in. His ranch sat 30 miles from the nearest town, where the plains rolled empty and the stars looked close enough to touch. For 6 years, silence had lived there with him. Silence at breakfast. Silence in the barn. Silence beside the cold half of the bed. Then Evelyn Cross arrived on the noon train with one leather suitcase, one wedding paper, and eyes that measured every doorway before she stepped through it. She was polite in the careful way of people who trust nothing for free. She thanked him for the wagon ride. She complimented the cottonwoods by the creek. She smiled once when his old mule sneezed. But even smiling, she kept glancing behind them at the road. Jonah noticed such things because lonely men become students of small details. He noticed she wore gloves though the day was warm enough for shirt sleeves. He noticed she never asked to see the house until she had first walked the perimeter of the barn. He noticed she set her suitcase under the bed before she unpacked a single dress. Supper was beans, cornbread, and coffee strong enough to wake the dead. They ate mostly in quiet. Not awkward quiet. Guarded quiet. When he offered her the larger bedroom, she said, "I'd rather sleep where I can hear the front door." That was the first strange thing she said. The second came an hour later when she asked, "How far does sound travel out here?" Jonah answered honest. On a clear night, farther than a man's regrets. She looked at him then as if weighing whether he was foolish or wise. Near midnight, Jonah woke to a soft, steady tapping against the window. Dirt. He sat upright. Another tap. Then another. He reached for the shotgun beside the bed, opened the front door, and stepped into silver moonlight barefoot on cold boards. The yard was empty for half a breath. Then he saw her. Evelyn stood beside the barn in her white wedding dress, sleeves rolled, hands wrapped around a shovel. She was digging a narrow hole 3 feet deep where no hole had been at sunset. Her hair had come loose in the wind. Soil darkened the hem of her dress. She froze when she saw him, chest rising hard. "Ma'am," Jonah said quietly, because some moments punish loud voices, folks usually wait until morning to bury things. Her eyes filled, but no tears fell. She glanced toward the road instead of the grave. "It isn't for what you think," she whispered. Then the prairie answered for her. Hoofbeats. Fast. More than one rider. Jonah turned toward the dark horizon where 3 lanterns bounced like angry stars. Metal flashed under moonlight. Badges. Evelyn gripped the shovel so tight her knuckles paled beneath the dirt. "If they ask for me," she said, voice breaking at last, "do not tell them I was your wife." The riders reached the gate in a cloud of pale dust and horse sweat. Their lanterns swung low, throwing crooked light across the fence posts Jonah had repaired that very morning. The lead man wore a Marshall star polished bright enough to catch the moon. He sat straight in the saddle, too clean for a road this rough, with gloves that had never known ranch work. "Evening," he called, though his voice carried no warmth. "We are looking for a woman traveling under the name Evelyn Cross." Jonah rested one hand on the porch rail and kept the other where it could be seen. Men who hurry their hands often shorten their lives. "You found a ranch," he said. "Whether you found the rest depends on your manners." The 2 deputies behind the marshal shifted in their saddles. Nervous men always move when silence starts winning. The marshal studied him, then glanced toward the barn where shadows hid more than boards and hay. "My name is Dean Holloway. United States Marshal. That woman is wanted for theft, fraud, and assisting dangerous men." He drew a folded paper from his coat but did not offer it. "She may also be armed." Jonah almost smiled at that. The woman with the shovel had looked many things in moonlight. Armed was not the first word that came to mind. I have seen coyotes, hailstorms, and politicians carry papers, Jonah said. Only one of those ever improved my night. Holloway's jaw tightened. Step aside, Mr. Mercer. Hearing his own name from a stranger put a cold pebble in Jonah's stomach. He had not introduced himself. Behind the barn, a board creaked softly. Evelyn. Still there. Still listening. Holloway heard it too. His eyes moved for a moment, then returned. You married her today, he said. That was quick work for a grieving widower. The prairie seemed to stop breathing. Jonah had told no one in town why he wanted a wife, and fewer still knew how long he had worn black after the fever took his family. You ask a great deal for a man who knocks after midnight, Jonah said quietly. And know a great deal for one I never invited. Holloway leaned forward in the saddle. I know enough to tell you this. That woman leaves trouble behind her like sparks in dry grass. 2 banks emptied. 3 partners vanished. A judge in Kansas ruined. The words were sharp. Too sharp. Prepared words often are. Jonah listened not to what was said, but to what was missing. No dates. No towns. No witnesses. Just smoke without fire. A gust rolled through the yard carrying the scent of turned earth from the half-dug grave. One deputy crossed himself when he noticed it. Holloway did not. He already knew it was there. That was the moment Jonah understood the road had not led these men here by chance. Marshal, Jonah said, voice calm as creek water in winter, if you came for truth, dismount. If you came for theater, keep your seat. From behind the barn came Evelyn's voice, thin and trembling yet clear enough to cut the night. Do not believe the badge, Jonah. He wore another name when he sold girls west. Some lies arrive shouting. The dangerous ones arrive wearing authority. No one moved for a long second after Evelyn spoke. The horses stamped and snorted at the smell of fresh earth. Wind tugged at lantern flames until shadows bent across the yard like crooked fingers. Marshal Dean Holloway smiled first, and that alone told Jonah more than anger would have. Fear makes women imaginative, Holloway said. Especially guilty women. Evelyn stepped from behind the barn still holding the shovel, dirt on her sleeves, moonlight catching the strain in her face. She looked smaller now than she had at supper, not weak, only tired in a place deeper than bones. Tell him your first name in St. Louis, she said. Tell him what business you ran from the back room above the feed store. One deputy looked sideways at the other. Holloway noticed. Men who live by control can smell doubt quicker than rain. You have one chance to be wise, Mr. Mercer, he said, voice harder now. Hand her over, and this becomes simple. Jonah stepped off the porch and onto the yard, boots crunching dry gravel. Simple things do not usually ride 3 men to a lone ranch after midnight. He kept walking until he stood halfway between Evelyn and the gate. Not close enough to threaten. Close enough to choose. Holloway drew a folded document again and this time held it higher. Federal warrant. Jonah did not reach for it. Then read it, he said. Holloway hesitated just a fraction too long. That is not how this works. It is tonight. Silence settled again. Somewhere beyond the cottonwoods, a night bird called once and thought better of it. Holloway cleared his throat and read quickly, too quickly, naming no judge Jonah recognized and no county Jonah had ever heard spoken by honest lawmen. The paper fluttered in the wind because his hand had started to shake. Evelyn laughed then, one short sound with no joy in it. He writes them himself when ink is cheaper than truth. The younger deputy swallowed hard. Marshal, maybe we should verify in town. Holloway turned his head slow as winter. You are paid to ride, not think. That landed badly. Jonah saw it in the deputy's face. Pride is a door, insult opens it. Evelyn lowered the shovel and looked at Jonah for the first time since the riders arrived. "I did not come here to trick you," she said softly. "I answered your letter because you asked for honesty and quiet. I have been running so long I forgot those could exist together." She reached into the pocket sewn inside her skirt and removed a small ledger wrapped in cloth. Even Holloway's horse shifted when it saw his master tense. "Names," Evelyn said. "Girls taken west. Towns. Payments. Men who bought papers and people." She held the ledger out toward Jonah, not Holloway. Trust, once given to the right hands, can sound louder than gunfire. Holloway's calm broke like thin ice. "Take that book," he snapped at the deputies. Neither man moved. Jonah accepted the ledger and felt its weight. It was small enough for one hand, heavy enough to bend a life. He looked at Holloway and spoke in the same tone he used with frightened horses. "Marshal, I believe your night has changed. Truth does not always need a loud voice. Sometimes it only needs a little book and enough moonlight to read by." Jonah opened the cloth wrapping and thumbed through the ledger while the yard held its breath. Names filled the pages in careful handwriting. Women. Ages. Rail stops. Amounts paid. Notes in the margins colder than winter fence wire. Good teeth. Can sew. Quiet nature. Sent west. Jonah had traded cattle, hay, and land in his life. Seeing people listed like freight made something old and stern wake inside him. He lifted his eyes to Holloway. "You haul cargo often, Marshal?" Holloway forced a laugh that landed nowhere. "A grieving rancher is now a judge of handwriting." Jonah did not answer. He turned another page. There, between entries, sat initials pressed hard enough to dent the paper. DH beside them was a town date from 2 months ago. Same week the newspaper in Dry Creek mentioned a warehouse fire and missing records. Coincidences exist, but they rarely arrive in bunches. The younger deputy slid from his saddle. "Sir, I never agreed to this." Holloway's face tightened. "You agreed to wages." "I agreed to warrants," the deputy said. "Not this." His partner remained mounted but would not meet Holloway's eyes. Men reveal themselves quickest when they stop looking straight ahead. Evelyn stood near the barn door, shoulders trembling now that someone besides her had spoken against him. She had run so long her body no longer knew how to stand still. Jonah noticed she had not stepped closer to safety. Some people, once hunted enough, no longer trust shelter. "Why the grave?" he asked without turning. The question drifted soft across the yard. Evelyn answered after a pause. "Because I buried this ledger once. Already. Outside Wichita. He dug it back up before dawn." Holloway barked a short bitter sound. "And she stole it again." "No," she said. "I rescued it." The wind shifted, carrying the smell of rain from miles away. Plains folk learn to read weather and character the same way, by what changes first. Holloway's confidence was gone. In its place sat hurry. "Mr. Mercer," he said, voice suddenly reasonable, "give me the book and I will forget she was here." "You keep your marriage." "I keep my duty." Jonah closed the ledger. "Funny thing about duty," he said. "Real men do not negotiate with it." He walked to the hitching rail, set the book on a post, and unbuttoned his coat. Beneath it, pinned neat and dull with age, was a badge older than Holloway's shine and heavier than his star would ever be. United States Circuit Judge, retired by illness, not disgrace. Jonah had once carried law across 3 territories before sorrow sent him into silence. The deputies stared. Holloway did too, though he tried to hide it. "You said you were a rancher," he muttered. "Tonight I am both," Jonah replied. He looked to the younger deputy. "Son, remove that gentleman's sidearm and help him down before pride makes him clumsy." The deputy moved at once. Holloway reached for command and found none left in the yard. Evelyn covered her mouth, tears finally falling clean tracks through the dust on her cheeks. Jonah picked up the ledger again and glanced toward the half-dug grave. "Ma'am," he said gently, "seems you can stop digging. We have something better than a hole now. We have morning coming. Dawn has a way of exposing what darkness tries to arrange." By first light, Marshal Dean Holloway sat on Jonah Mercer's porch with his wrists tied by plain rope and his polished boots gray with ranch dust. The two deputies stood nearby, hats in hand, looking less like officers and more like men reconsidering the roads they had chosen. The storm that threatened all night never came. Instead, the sky opened clean and pale, stretching gold over the pasture and silver over the creek. Jonah brewed coffee strong enough to wake memory itself. He poured 1 cup for Evelyn, 1 for each deputy, and set none aside for Holloway. Justice can be loud in cities. Out here, sometimes it is measured in who gets offered warmth. Evelyn sat at the kitchen table wrapped in Jonah's wool coat. Without fear in her eyes, she looked younger and older at once. Some burdens steal years while carrying them, then return a few when they are set down. She held the ledger with both hands as if it might vanish if she blinked. "I should have burned it," she said quietly. Jonah placed biscuits on a plate and shook his head. "Fire destroys evidence and kitchens alike. Best not to trust it indoors." One deputy laughed despite himself. Tension left the room in a small honest sound. Holloway called from the porch. "You think one notebook ends me?" Jonah answered through the screen door. "No, sir. I think the names inside it begin you." By mid-morning, a wagon from Dry Creek rattled into the yard carrying Sheriff Amos Pike, a thick man with sleepy eyes and a mind sharper than folks guessed. He read 3 pages of the ledger and lost all trace of sleep. He read 5 more and removed Holloway's star himself. No speeches. No drama. Just a badge dropping into a flour sack. The deputies volunteered statements before being asked twice. Truth often forms a line once the first brave soul steps forward. Sheriff Pike then turned to Evelyn. "Ma'am, you are free to go where you please until federal men sort this out." She looked from the open door to the road beyond it, then to Jonah standing by the stove. Freedom after long fear can feel like standing at the edge of a cliff. "I do not know where to go," she admitted. Jonah nodded as if she had commented on the weather. "There is fence to mend on the north side," he said. "And someone has to teach me why my bread always turns to stone." Sheriff Pike hid a smile under his mustache. Holloway did not. He stared at Jonah with the empty anger of a man who had mistaken power for permanence. When the wagon rolled away carrying him toward town, dust rose behind it and then settled, same as all dust does. Silence returned to the ranch, but it was not the old silence. This one had footsteps in the kitchen and a second cup drying by the sink. Near the barn, the half-dug grave still waited in the earth. Evelyn walked to it with the shovel, paused, and filled it back in 1 scoop at a time. Jonah watched from the porch. "What was meant for the grave?" he asked. She rested on the handle and looked up at him through morning light. "My old name," she said. He considered that, then tipped his hat. "Good. We have no use for it here. Some hearts do not open all at once. They open like old barns in winter, 1 hinge at a time." 3 weeks passed over Jonah Mercer's ranch with the steady rhythm of honest work. Mornings began in blue cold, with frost silvering the fence rails and the smell of coffee drifting through the kitchen window. By noon the sun warmed the fields enough for jackets to come off. By evening the sky turned copper, and the house no longer felt abandoned. Evelyn moved through it quietly at first, as if afraid the walls might reject her. She scrubbed shelves already clean, folded towels already straight, and thanked Jonah for things too small to mention. Gratitude can be a habit in people who have had little kindness. Jonah did not crowd her with questions. Men who have known grief learn that silence, properly offered, is a form of shelter. Instead he showed her where the flour was kept, how the south gate stuck in damp weather, and which mare liked apples more than discipline. She learned fast. Faster than he expected. Within days she could patch harness leather, set bread to rise by instinct, and calm the skittish mule no one but Jonah had touched in years. "You have a way with stubborn things," he said one afternoon. She looked at him over the flour bowl. "Practice," she answered. It was the first joke he had heard in that kitchen since before the fever years. He laughed so suddenly it surprised them both. Yet peace, when new, often walks beside fear. Some nights Jonah woke to the sound of footsteps on the porch. He would find Evelyn wrapped in a blanket, sitting in the rocking chair, eyes fixed on the road. "Nothing out there," he would say. "That is what worries me," she replied. So he brought a second chair outside and sat beside her until dawn painted the horizon. No grand words. Just two. People learning that company does not always demand conversation. In town, rumors traveled faster than wagons. Some said Jonah had married a fugitive. Some said he had exposed a federal ring of thieves. Others claimed the woman at his ranch could read minds, tame horses, or poison men with a glance. Dry Creek had always preferred stories to facts. Sheriff Pike rode out one Saturday to deliver mail and warn them that strangers had been asking questions. "Men from St. Louis," he said, sipping coffee at the table. "Too polished for ranch hands. Too curious for tourists." Evelyn's hands tightened around her cup. Jonah noticed and changed the subject to cattle prices until the sheriff left. Later, in the barn, he found her packing the same leather suitcase she had hidden under the bed on the day she arrived. "If trouble follows me," she said without looking up, "I will not have it root here." Jonah leaned against the stall door. "Trouble found this place long before you did." She stopped folding. "You do not owe me rescue every season." "Good," he said. "I dislike debts." Then he stepped closer and set one weathered hand on the suitcase lid. "But I do honor partnerships." Her eyes shone, though no tears fell. She slowly unpacked the dresses again. That evening they mended fence on the north pasture together, stretching fresh wire between cedar posts while meadowlarks called from the grass. Near sunset Evelyn asked the question softly, almost to the wind. "Why did you truly send for a wife?" Jonah pulled the wire tight and considered the far hills. "Because I was tired of hearing only myself in this world." She nodded as if she understood more than the sentence held. Then, from the distant road, came the faint roll of wheels and the glint of two black carriages heading straight for the ranch. Money travels in polished wheels and usually arrives believing it owns the road. The two black carriages rolled through Jonah Mercer's gate just as the sun slipped low behind the pasture. Their paint shone like wet stone, and their horses wore silver tack too fine for ranch country. Men stepped down first, city men in dark coats with boots untouched by manure or mud. Then an older woman emerged from the rear carriage, straight back despite the miles, dressed in morning gray with gloves buttoned to the wrist. She looked once at the barn, once at the house, and then fixed her eyes on Evelyn as if searching a face she had carried in memory for years. Evelyn went pale enough that Jonah set down the fence pliers. "No," she whispered, "not to them but to the past itself." The older woman removed one glove finger by finger. "You still say no the same way, child." Her voice was rich and calm, with the kind of control money mistakes for virtue. Evelyn took one step backward. Jonah moved beside her without speaking. The woman noticed and gave him a thin nod. "I am Margaret Vale," she said. "Widow of Horace Vale. I believe my daughter has been using another name." Wind passed through the grass and left nothing standing where certainty had been. Jonah felt Evelyn tense beside him. "Daughter." The word seemed to strike her harder than accusation ever had. "You told me they were dead," Evelyn said, voice small and sharp at once. Margaret's eyes lowered for the first time. "Your father is." She glanced at the men behind her. "And many truths with him." Jonah invited no one in, but he did gesture toward the porch. Even storms deserve chairs before judgment. They sat beneath the fading sky while the hired men remained by the wagons. Margaret studied the ranch house, the patched roof, the mended rails, the clean porch boards. "So this is where you vanished." Evelyn stared ahead. "This is where I was found." The older woman accepted the blow without flinching. Some people are practiced at deserving them. She reached into a leather case and produced documents tied with blue ribbon. Deeds. Bank letters. Probate seals. "Your father built a fortune moving freight, rail contracts, and land," she said. "When the authorities opened his ledgers after his death, they found enough corruption to poison 3 states. Hidden among those records were letters proving something else." She looked directly at Jonah now. "That my daughter was sent away under false guardianship at 16 after refusing a marriage arranged for profit." Evelyn's hand shook. "I was told I had debts to repay." "You had inheritance to erase," Margaret said softly. The prairie went quiet in that terrible way it sometimes does before weather breaks. Jonah understood then why men from St. Louis had asked questions. They were not hunting a fugitive. They were hunting an heir. Margaret placed the ribbon papers on the porch table. "Every account not seized by the government now passes to her." Evelyn did not touch them. "Why come now?" she asked. Margaret's voice finally cracked. "Because cowardice ages poorly." No one spoke for several breaths. Then one of the hired men hurried from the road, hat in hand. "Ma'am," he called, looking shaken. 3 riders coming hard from the east. Armed with warrants and asking for Miss Vale by name. Margaret closed her eyes. "Then Horace's partners have moved faster than the law." Evelyn turned to Jonah, fear and apology already rising in her face. But Jonah only stood, reached for the old badge in his coat pocket, and said, "Supper will have to wait." There are nights when a ranch becomes a courthouse simply because one honest man is standing on the porch. The 3 riders came through the east pasture fast enough to scatter cattle, coats snapping behind them, horses lathered from miles of hard road. They were not officers. Real law announces itself with papers. These men announced themselves with speed. Jonah Mercer stepped to the porch rail and lit the lantern beside the door. Warm light spread across the boards, the table, the ribboned inheritance papers, and the old badge now pinned to his coat. Beside him stood Evelyn, pale but steady. On the other side stood Margaret Vale, spine straight as iron despite the tremor in her hands. The lead rider reined in 10 yards from the steps. He wore city clothes under trail dust and smiled the way wolves might if taught manners. "Evening," he said. "We have private business with Miss Vale." Jonah nodded toward the open pasture behind them. "Private things are welcome to stay private out there." The rider's smile thinned. "You misunderstand. We represent investors owed substantial sums." Margaret spoke before fear could stop her. "You represent thieves who signed beside my husband." The man tipped his hat slightly. "Madam remembers us." "Good." He produced folded papers and waved them high. "Claims on assets. Debts inherited by blood." Jonah did not move. Then placed them on the rail and stepped back. "I prefer to hand them to the lady herself." "I prefer many things," Jonah said. "Yet here we are." The 2 men behind the speaker spread wider in the yard, trying to shape a circle around the porch. Old habits. Jonah had seen lesser men do the same in courtrooms when truth cornered them. Evelyn touched his sleeve lightly. "They will not stop," she whispered. "Then they chose a poor destination," he replied. Sheriff Pike's wagon appeared at the far gate just then, lantern bouncing, followed by 4 ranchers from Dry Creek carrying nothing but watchful faces and long memories of Jonah's fairness. News travels quickest when trouble thinks it is alone. The lead rider glanced back and lost some shine. Pike climbed down slow, chewing tobacco like time itself. Evening, he said to no one in particular. Herd men were serving legal papers without registering in town. That is frowned upon by people who can read. One rancher chuckled. Another spat into the dust. The riders no longer looked large. Jonah extended his hand. Your documents. Reluctantly, the lead man dismounted and passed them up. Jonah read by lantern light. Blank signature lines. No court seal. Amounts changed in different inks. Fraud written so plainly it almost felt lazy. He handed them to Pike, who snorted. This would not survive a chicken coop dispute. Margaret let out a breath she had likely held for years. The rider straightened and tried one final tone of command. Miss Vale belongs to obligations she does not understand. Evelyn stepped forward then, voice clear enough to reach the pasture fence. I belonged to lies once. That account is closed. Even the horses seemed to listen. Jonah descended one step from the porch, not threatening, merely certain. You heard the lady. The men looked at the growing crowd, the sheriff, the badge on Jonah's coat, and the house glowing warm behind the woman they had come to frighten. Then they chose the oldest wisdom in the West. They turned around. As hoofbeats faded into the dark, Margaret stared at Evelyn with wet eyes. I cannot return what was taken, she said. Evelyn looked at the doorway, then at Jonah. No, she answered softly. But you can come in for supper. Winter came soft that year, as if the land itself had decided the ranch had seen enough hard weather. By the first frost, the papers from St. Louis had been verified, the false claims dismissed, and men who once hid behind polished desks were learning how narrow a jail window can be. Sheriff Pike delivered the final ruling in person, mostly because he enjoyed coffee at Jonah Mercer's table and because good news deserves a horse ride. Evelyn Vale, legally restored to her family name and fortune, now owned more property on paper than half the county combined. She listened, thanked him kindly, and used the decree to level one leg of the kitchen table that had wobbled for months. Pike laughed so hard he had to remove his hat. Word spread fast. Folks expected wagons of furniture, hired servants, city dresses, perhaps a grand departure back east. Instead, lumber arrived for a schoolhouse in Dry Creek. Then seed for widows whose fields had failed. Then blankets for families too proud to ask and too cold to refuse. Every receipt bore her proper name, but every delivery came quietly before dawn. Wealth, in the right hands, stops trying to be seen. Margaret Vale remained through Christmas, learning the slower language of repair. She burned biscuits twice, cried once over onions and once over nothing at all, and grew fond of the mule who disliked nearly everyone else. Some evenings she and Evelyn sat on the porch wrapped in shawls, saying little while the sky turned amber. Not all forgiveness arrives as words. Sometimes it looks like staying long enough to be ordinary together. Jonah changed too, though he would have denied it. He whistled while mending tack. He shaved more regularly. He argued with Evelyn about fence lines only because arguing with someone means expecting them tomorrow. The old silence had left the ranch for good. In its place came laughter from the kitchen, footsteps before sunrise, and 2 cups set out each. Morning without discussion. One January afternoon, a banker from the city arrived in a polished sleigh to discuss management of Miss Vale's holdings. He wore perfume too expensive for common sense and addressed every sentence to Evelyn while glancing at Jonah as if he were hired help. She heard him out politely, then asked one question. Can you repair a broken windmill in 20-mile-per-hour gusts? The banker blinked. Certainly not. She nodded toward the door. Then the man running my most valuable asset is already employed. After he left, Jonah pretended to study harness straps so she would not see him smile. Spring touched the prairie early. Meadowlarks returned. Grass pushed green through old ground. On the anniversary of the night she arrived, Evelyn walked to the spot beside the barn where the half-dug grave had once scarred the earth. Nothing remained there now except wildflowers and one flat stone Jonah had set in secret. She read the words carved by his careful hand. Old name buried here. New life started nearby. When she turned, he was standing a few yards back, hat in hand like a nervous boy instead of a man weathered by years. "Ma'am," he said, voice rougher than usual, "I never was much good at speeches." "That makes two of us," she answered. He held out a small ring, simple silver, no flourish. "Then let us keep this brief. Would you stay even if there was no fortune left?" Tears brightened her eyes, but her smile was steady as sunrise. "Jonah," she said, taking his hand before the ring, "I stayed when I thought there was none.